Welcome back at another session with the wonderful Thomas Ramstad and Yoke van Dam. So he's dialing in from Norway and I'm from South Africa. And Thomas, today's session's all about really putting values into practice. So I'm just going to jump into the first question for you. Why is it important for a leader to be humble? And how can we encourage our teams to participate in discussions and working with us through remaining humble, not always, shining the light on ourselves and being the star of the team.
I think it's very important for leaders to be humble. Let's draw a picture because if you know about tribes, for example, in Greenland or Africa or native USA, the leaders of the tribe, the sort of the round table of the tribe, they usually were old men and women. And
Mm.
the reason why they were old is, of course, the knowledge and experience and things like that. But probably the main point was that they didn't need to shine. They had the patience. They had lived their lives, so they were actually humble. They knew that there were several aspects and different sides of a case. And in order to listen to people, in order to be patient, you have to be humble so you can be able to listen to people.
Yeah, I love that picture sitting around that campfire with that wisdom. They were very often the storyteller as well, but really, like you're saying, the mediator, the listener coming with the different perspective. Why is trust important for lead?
If, for example, in a company, you have people with an issue they want to talk about, or you have problems within a team, your employees, they have to have the trust that they can come to you and talk about their issue. Because if not, the problem will just grow. It won't go away. And the other thing is that you have to have trust if you have to have an innovative culture, which is needed today. You have to have trust within the team and within the workplace in order for people to actually speak up. They might disagree, friction is good. So in order to encourage friction and for people to be able to dare to disagree, you have to have trust. Otherwise, they will feel fear and they will just sit down with their opinion and probably knowledge and experience and just sit tight. So trust is vital for a company to build an innovative culture.
So it's almost like if they don't feel that they can trust their manager, they're not actually going to say if something's wrong. And then there could be a fire brewing, which can really be damaging to the company. I was actually saying in a training session yesterday, we were talking about many years ago. I don't know if you ever read about those flights that kept on crashing. I think it was Air
Mhm.
Malaysia. And what was happening there, very often the captain and the co pilot didn't feel that sense of psychological safety to actually say to the manager, there's eyes on the wings. So they would rather keep quiet. And ultimately, it led to the deaths of so many people because they didn't actually speak up when they noticed there were things wrong with the aircraft. So, in some ways, they actually had to remove the hierarchy so that those pilots could just call each other by their first name so that they could feel comfortable enough to actually speak the truth. So many people are working remotely or they just go into the office a few days, a month, or a week. How can a manager show that they're trusting their team? And where do you see that there is very little trust?
Yeah, that's a good question because now we're talking about hybrid working, we talk about empowerment, we're talking about trust, but those are just words and not action. If you're in an interview and they say, yeah, we don't do micromanagement, and when you're hired, they're looking over your shoulder or they want you to report, they want you to tell your plans for the day. And micromanagement is actually lack of trust. So the opposite of micromanagement is actually trusting people. So if you want to engage, There are many ways to engage with your employees and your team. It's actually talk to them and engage yourselves in meetings and ask them to show what they are doing and attend workshops or whatever. Just sit down and listen and show interest. It's the same with your kids, you don't have to watch them all the time, but just ask questions. What have you been doing today? I've been out playing football or cricket or rugby or just cycling around, or I watched a movie, and then you can ask, okay, what was the movie about? So you don't micromanage, but manage them, but you get involved. And what I did when I had people during the coronavirus pandemic was to actually drive around and visit people. I actually drove to their home and we took a walk for an hour. And that was not me watching them over the shoulder and to check what they were doing, but it was actually caring and asking them how they were doing, how was the work going, how was the private life, how are things at home, things like that. So just an hour once a month, it's a good example of just, caring instead of actually trying to micromanage people.
So literally like spending time with people. And I know that in the IT industry, I love the concept where people have stand-ups, or like you're saying, also having some scheduled meetings so that in those times you could address any issues people have. So it's not actually asking them to every hour send you an update on what they've done or screening every email that they're getting, but rather trusting them with the work that you're giving them, that they will come to you, but actually allocating the time so that you have set time in your diary to spend with them. So I love what you were
Yeah.
saying, that you actually went to them. So you allocated quite a bit of your time to make them feel comfortable, which I think was much nicer than just doing a online call. Exercise. It's good.
Yeah, it takes time. It takes more time than, for example, meeting online like we
Mm,
are doing now. But
mm.
it really pays off, and it's nice to meet people face to face as well and actually do a walk and talk. And like you said as well, instead of browsing through the emails, for example, show your interest in the outcome. If they're having a demo, show up, encourage them to demo or show them what they're doing and tell them their plans. If, for example, they are doing a discovery phase, let's say they are going out there visiting a customer or visiting a shop, join them. Then you get to know them and they get to know you, and you get to know what they're actually doing and what they're planning and the problems and everything. And it's much more fun.
I love that. I think it actually shows a lot of support when the manager
Yes.
cares for the outcome. And when you're actually pitching up for that demo or that client visit, it also elevates that meeting to another level where the client also feels that you, as the manager, also care about them. And it allows that team member to then learn from you. I used to have this incredible manager who very often went out with us. And I think I learned the most by actually watching his style, how he interacted with the clients. So you can learn a lot by mirroring people's behavior, hearing how they do dialogue, how they do negotiations, just how they build rapport in general, the kind of stories they pull in or case studies. I'm a very
Uh,
big fan of Brene Brown, and she's been speaking for years about vulnerability and opening up. Why is it important that a team can trust you as a manager enough to be vulnerable and actually share what is really going on at home if there are issues?
I think that's really important to actually be vulnerable. Vulnerable is not equal to being weak. It's quite the opposite, actually. Let's say in the workplace you are having problems at home, you will not perform, We have been talking a lot about team sport, and let's do soccer or rugby. And if you have a squad, and there are some team players that are having problems at home. There might be a father or mother, brother. During the World Cup, there was a player that was his family was actually robbed. I think it was his father was kidnapped as well. And as a coach, you can't ignore that. Even people say, well, you have private life and you have professional life. So when you come to work, you have to be professional.
No.
It can't be done.
Mm-mm.
It can't be done. You can't just leave outside the front door at your workplace that your father has been kidnapped. That is in you. So you have to deal with that. And it can be huge issues and it can be small issues. But you have to deal with them and you have to know them. Because if, for example, you have an employee that say that I'm redecorating my house, it's not going quite well. I have issues with the plumber and it's a huge issue. My wife is struggling. My kids can't go to the loo. It will affect you at work. So for you to be vulnerable and actually being able to tell that, for example, to your boss, that's good because then you can realize it and you can talk about it and you can discuss, okay, how can we facilitate for you to actually come to work and what do you need from us? You can be able to work because usually that is a good thing to actually come to work. But what do you need? Do you need to work less? Do you need some help from us? Do you want to talk about it? And that is quite a huge relief for people because then they can talk to somebody else, and their colleagues is usually a huge part of their life, their work. So being vulnerable is a great asset. Let's say you have a team and you are coming up with a new product, and Pixar did this, and with Toy Story, and they were playing around with the storyline, they were drawing pictures, and it wasn't working. The story wasn't working. There was no sort of build up, and they had put a lot of money into it. And Pixar has a very good culture when it comes to actually being quite straightforward, frank with each other. And that, for the other part, who has come up with the story, they have to be vulnerable as well. This is what I've done, hit me. But it's a good thing because the other person doesn't have to be afraid, being frank, straightforward, this is what I feel, this is what I mean. And the person that has actually written the story is being vulnerable as well. And it has nothing to do with them, it's about the story. So they're not being violated or they start crying because this is my life and work or whatever. It's about making a better story. And they did. They actually made a better story. So being vulnerable is a great asset in today's workplace.
I love that. I was recently reading a book by Adam Grant called Human Potential, and he
Mm.
said instead of asking people for feedback, which immediately implies that you've done something wrong or that it's going to be critical, if you can rather ask the frame or in the lens, so what would make it even better? So if you're thinking of that in terms of that Pixar story, it's not saying this sucks. You're a bad writer. It's actually looking at it and saying, I like the character of the little girl, but I think she needs to be a bit more dramatic. I think there needs to be more of a conflict. So you're actually adding to it and changing it in a way to make it better. And it's not criticizing the work necessarily, but moving it to a better place. I really love that. And it's about being open to know that your work will very often be a first draft version and that together we are always stronger than just having one person's point of view because other people can definitely move you much forward. When you were talking about a person's father was kidnapped or they've got plumbing issues at home, it makes me think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs that literally starts off with people's basic needs might be like air, water, food and shelter, then that sense of belonging. So would you say that leaders need to actually almost look at those hygiene factors first to realize that a person can't operate if they're being violated, if their loved ones are not okay, if they're, those various levels of Maslow.
There is a company here in Norway called Culture Intelligence, and what they do is they actually measure
Mm.
values of people in a company on a scale. And what they did was that they went to Cancer Research Institute, and those boys and girls, they actually need to be, you know, on top of what they're doing, you know. And they had to be really innovative. They have to scrutinize each other's work. They have to be humble. They have to be on their toes. And so they did an analysis before the pandemic, you know, COVID. And what they also did an analysis during COVID. And during COVID, the researchers, they didn't feel safe. They were anxious. They were anxious about job, and we
Yeah.
also had the war in Ukraine at that
Yes.
time. Yes.
Yes.
And energy prices, were going up. They were talking about huge lack of gas supply in Europe because Russia is a huge gas supplier to, for example, Germany. And so the whole of Europe had to refill all the gas storage, and food were getting more expensive. A lot of factors were actually influencing people's life.
Sure.
So they were feeling anxious, they were feeling afraid, they were feeling about their future. And you can imagine it's like the ladder game. You are falling down on Maslow's pyramid and you're feeling uncertain. And suddenly it's like, yes, I have shelter, but how is the future looking? Is it bright? Is it gloomy? And that will actually affect how you will perform at work. You will not be innovative. Your brain will not shut
Yeah.
down, but it's on its way. And that's quite interesting. So yes, leaders, they have to take Maslow's into account. And it's very, very good idea to also measure how people feel and actually compare that to the work they're doing and supposed to do. So totally agree.
Measuring how people feel. I love that. I was yesterday doing a exercise in that training session where people can actually look at their energy level as well as how pleasant their current state is, and then they can actually track the type of emotion that they're feeling based on words, based on where that positive psychology framework. And then what's interesting is they can actually see, does that word accurately describe how they're feeling or not? Is it actually something else? It's like the self-awareness, labeling it, and then asking yourself, how can I shift? What can I do to move out of this place? Is there something else that I need to do to actually shift that emotion so you don't have to necessarily stay there? Thomas, you always speak about leading by example. Why is that so important as a leader?
You're totally right. I talk about that quite often. There is a reason, because I believe in the same way I try to raise my kids by leading by example. It doesn't always work, but yes, okay, let me try at least. Let again go back to a team, and they're sitting down having a workshop discussing some issues. Let's say they are discussing that they are not vulnerable enough, and because they need to be vulnerable in order to be more innovative and more efficient. Okay, so if you, as a leader, lead by example, telling your team that this is the case, this is the subject for today, and I, for example, find it sometimes difficult to grasp what you're doing. And I'll give you an example from, for example, last week where you were talking about this. I didn't say it then, but I say it now. You were presenting this and this, and I didn't quite understand it. I find it difficult, and I think it's this and this, and I would love to have a chat with you later on to make me understand it better. And I think it's important that you actually tell and show that you are vulnerable and you have some difficulties, because a lot of people, a lot of companies, they have values. You want to be perceived as this and this and this, and you say you believe in this and this and this. For example, if you have integrity and
Mm,
openness as a
mm.
company value, and values, they are nothing unless you actually operationalize it. It means taking it into action, because values is nothing, actions, everything. So leading by example, you actually operationalize your values because you show people that the company's values are my values, and these are the actions that I actually, do every day to actually show that this is important to me. And if you don't do that, if you don't lead by examples, and if you don't lead by examples by showing people that, these are my actions based on the value, you will actually have a reality gap. People say, but these are our values, and you act in this way, that doesn't match. And then you have a reality gap. That again will lead to lack of trust, because then people say, I can't trust you because you say this and do this. And then you will have a lack of trust. People won't listen to you. You try to lead, but it doesn't work. People don't follow you. So, yes, it's a slippery slope. So, leading by example is really, really important.
So people would actually be watching you and mirroring those actions, and it's either going to be to the benefit of the company or the detriment of the company. It's up to you to
Yes.
decide if you're actually going to live the values yourself. Besides leading by example, would you say that training around a company's culture or values is important? Any recommendations there that you would give to a company on what they could potentially do training wise on values or culture?
I think training is a very good example of actually showing to your employees what you mean by the value. And with training, I don't mean that, okay, you should read, for example, these 10 pages and just rewrite in your own words. I'll give an example. Many years ago, I worked for ABB, and they had something called Flecht University, and they had values. And in Flecht University, they showed you examples of how cases where, for example, people doing under table negotiations or deals, discussing things that were sort of outside the contract and doing deals. And they showed you various episodes and various scenes. And they asked you questions, is this appropriate? Is this appropriate? And some of the scenes were just like minor differences in wording and things like that. But it showed you examples of how you should sort of operate and behave, and asked you questions accordingly. And that made you, because the episodes and the behavior was also matching your possession and your tasks that you were supposed to do every day. And that was a good example of how you can operationalize your values and how you can actually put that into training. So I think that's really good idea, because again, the values are nothing without action.
Thank you so much. I like ultimately using almost like a type of a case study of the type of work that you're doing and giving different scenarios, trying to see what would you go for or not, and then making you realize that you are actually choosing certain options and where are the tricky, almost like gray areas, or where would you stumble and where might it become unethical. And it's also going through certain things, doing certain assessments to make sure that they would behave in the appropriate way.
Yeah, as
Yeah.
long as it's not just like a paper test.
Like a tick box. Oh,
Yes, multiple choice. It has to be scenarios, and it has to make you think. And it also
yes.
it has to show you how they want you to behave, how you want to act and react. And you can have various scenarios, and all of them can show where you should actually report that incident. Because sometimes you are afraid that this is nothing, this is me, overreacting. And by showing small snippets of scenarios, the company can actually show that no, this is just fine. Because it doesn't necessarily lead to a talk with the employee. It might be just, okay, it has been reported fine. We didn't find anything, so we just put it in the shelf, but it's done.
Thank you so much, Thomas. I feel like we covered so much ground today. In summary, the core things that stood out for me is we spoke about how do you actually operationalize values, if I can use your term? How do you put your values into practice that doesn't just remain words. Why is it important to lead by example? Why is trust important as a leader and with your team? And how, if you're not trusting them, you might be micromanaging them? We looked at vulnerability and why it's important for you as a leader to be vulnerable, but also to allow your team to be vulnerable so that you can actually address the real issues. We looked at things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And then we also spoke about leading by example because people will actually mirror what you're doing, not just by what you are saying. And then lastly, we spoke about the type of training that you could actually implement to make sure that your values actually become actions. And like Tommy's was saying, don't make it a paper-based test. Have real scenarios, have real behaviors, have real discussions so that you can have robust dialogue and even debate around this. And then ultimately, hopefully, you can close that gap between the value and how you actually want people to behave at work. Another beautiful leadership lyric session with Thomas Ramstad from Norway and Yoke van Dam. See you soon.